Welcome to AFibulous Life, Unlimited Conversation, the podcast where we explore what it really means to live, adapt, and thrive with atrial fibrillation. Hosted by Jim Kaveney, this is a space for real stories, expert insights, and honest conversations about heart health, resilience, and life beyond diagnosis, because AFib doesn't define you. And with the right support, your life can still be unlimited.
All right, good afternoon and welcome back to AFibulous Life, Unlimited Conversation. Very excited today to talk about the theme of today's podcast is going to be from patient to pioneer, really empowering the AFib community through knowledge, advocacy, and lifestyle. And I have one of the best in the industry that I must say from a patient advocacy perspective and just a powerhouse when it comes to understanding research, understanding AFib in general, and how this individual has changed the AFib experiences for people across the globe to really have a significant impact. And so one of the key things that we want to keep emphasizing, and building off of our last podcast with Deb Halligan, is focusing on that whole concept of the center of excellence as a patient. Because we have, as individuals, as everybody knows, I am as well an AFib patient. Sometimes I try not to say that anymore because I'm not burdened by the signs and symptoms of AFib anymore, but understanding that, hey, there are things that I could do and there's things that we can do as individuals to build ourselves into being that center of excellence, because we have the power. And now what I want to do is introduce the woman that has really been involved in really bringing the knowledge to the patients and to myself specifically, because I was lost until I found her. So please let me welcome Mellanie True Hills. She is the CEO of the American Foundation for Women's Health and the founder of StopAFib.org. And as I said earlier, she is probably one of the most influential patient advocates in AFib globally. As she was just sharing with me, she's getting ready to go jump on a plane in about 24 hours and not be back for three weeks. So she's always on the road. So Mellanie, thank you and welcome for making some time for us today.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's a joy and pleasure to be here with you and with your audience.
Yeah, thank you. And you've done some unique things, and particularly, I look at you as kind of a bridge really between patients, clinicians, and research. Tell me a little bit about the AFib experience that you had that made you have this kind of connection to say, I need to do something more transformational, not only for yourself, but for the community in general. So before we dive into your specific patient experience, tell me a little bit about that for you. How did you get to that point?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I am AFib free, and I have been for more than 20 years now. But my AFib started very much like everybody else's. Never heard of it. And all of a sudden, my heart takes off. It skips a beat, and it just takes off racing. And I wasn't really sure what was going on, so I went over and lay down on the sofa. My husband brought over the blood pressure cuff. My, blood pressure wasn't really that unusual, but I knew something was wrong. And so we rushed to the emergency room and discovered there that I had AFib. And I'd never heard of it. The doctor said, we want you to go see a cardiologist. Here's who we would recommend. And so I went off to see a cardiologist, and he told me about AFib, got me started on a blood thinner, and really set me on the right path. And he said, you'll be fine. And I thought, okay, I'll get on with my life. Well,
sure.
AFib had other plans for me. And so I never knew when the AFib beast would strike. I could be, washing the dog, or I could be, just doing work around the house, and all of a sudden it would just hit me. And, I wasn't really sure what to do. And the doctor said, and one time I was actually out walking, and I got, I was half a mile from the house, and my heart just started racing, and I called my husband and said, please come get me. And he came and got me. The doctor said, just take an extra beta blocker, and if you don't convert, then call me back. And fortunately, I did convert, but this would happen kind of sporadically. And I was never stable on Coumadin, which was the old blood thinner, but that's what was available at the time. And so
Sure.
I was ping-ponging between blood that was too thick and blood that was too thin, and I was, am I going to have a bleed? Am I going to have a stroke? And so I discovered that there was a new surgical procedure, surgical ablation, minimally invasive, called a mini maze. And
Okay.
I studied and I had that procedure. And that also included removing my left atrial appendage so that I
Okay.
didn't have the risk of a stroke. And I got my life back from it. I
Wow.
had the procedure at about 22 months of having been diagnosed of AFib,
Yep.
and I got my life back. And
Amazing.
of course, I was very cautious about what was going on and making sure I didn't go back into AFib. And after a few months, when I realized I truly wasn't going back into AFib, I started thinking about, okay, can I help other people? So I said, somebody needs to do something, and it might as well be me. And
Sure.
that's when I made the decision that I was going to do something to help other people find their solution too.
That's amazing. That's amazing journey. And I can appreciate that because it mirrored a little bit of what I went through. Obviously, I didn't
Mhm,
get the mini maze. I went through the RFA ablation, the
mhm.
radio frequency ablation. I guess, so your journey was about 22 months
22
before you
months.
had the,
Hmm.
the mini maze.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, so the mini maze is not readily spoken about
Yeah.
right now as much as maybe it should be. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah. That's part of the reason that when we do our patient conference, we have the surgeons who do the minimally invasive surgical ablation, as well as, excuse me, as well as the electrophysiologists who
Yeah,
do catheter ablations, so that we have all areas represented.
sure.
And so typically, catheter ablation is an easier procedure, less invasive, shorter recovery time. Often these days it's outpatient, so you're sent home within 23 hours or less. Whereas with the mini maze or minimally invasive surgical ablation, that's typically a stay at the hospital of a few days. At the time I had it, it was a 3-day stay, or should I say 3-night stay.
Okay.
It's shorter than that now, but still it's a little bit more invasive and a little bit more of a recovery. And it's not usually considered first option.
Sure.
But in my case, I started doing the research, the success rates were higher, and I could have had a couple of catheter ablations, but I decided I wanted one and done. And
Yeah.
so that's what caused me to decide to go to the more invasive procedure first, because
Okay.
I thought might have a higher chance of not having to go through it again.
Right. Right. And I want to emphasize something real quick, which is so important because, along my experience with mine, I was 38 years old when I was diagnosed, and for the audience as well, I was heavily involved in pharmaceutical and biotech, so I was exposed to everything. I had my fingertips on everything out there, and yet I was still unable to find the resources for AFib that would have opened me up to those ideas of the mini maze. And I'm so grateful that you and I now have a friendship, but I'm so disappointed that I didn't get to know you earlier because I don't think we connected until probably what, 4 years ago? I think it's
Yeah,
been it's been about
yeah,
4 years. And
yeah.
so my last ablation was in 2018.
Hmm.
And so I didn't stumble upon stopafib.org until well after I was, on my own,
Hmm.
feeling AFib free. Now I'm 7 years, 8 years, 7 years out now. And so, boy, I mean, I probably would have addressed some things a little bit differently too at the age of,
Hmm.
at the time I was 44 years old. So,
Hmm.
so I'm so grateful for what you've been doing and where you're going. So your journey, obviously, and your experience was about 22 months in general, but,
Hmm.
you know, I know you talked about, hey, I need to take control of this, which was great, but was there anything at any one point that you wish had existed then that exists now that might maybe would have made your experience a little bit different?
Yeah, certainly the DOACs, the newer blood thinners, would have made life a
Okay.
lot easier for me because I was on Coumadin. I was never stable on Coumadin. I was actually, some people are able to go a month between testing. I would go a week between testing and sometimes 3 days. And
Okay.
so I was all over the place. And so we were constantly having to adjust my dose, and there just was no way to be stable. And it was back in the, and I was following a medication that would have potentially been one of the first novel anticoagulants, but it didn't make it. It had some issues. And
Yeah.
so it was the clinical trial was withdrawn. But that was at the time my hope is that I'd be able to find a blood thinner that I could be stable on. And in the summer, just before I had my procedure, there was a study that came out that said that some people are not going to be stable on Coumadin for genetic reasons.
Okay.
And that's when I realized that that was probably going to be my life if I didn't do something. I was going to have this nightmare all the
Right.
time of trying to be stable and not. And that was what really caused me to seriously consider the surgical procedure because it takes care of the left atrial appendage. In
Right.
my case, it was removed. They've subsequently come along with a little clip called the AtriClip that's like a hairbread that closes off the left atrial appendage. And so that might have been done if it had come along sooner, but it was after my procedure. But these days we have lots of options for managing stroke risk, and stroke risk was the real concern. So if the DOACs, like we have Eliquis and Xarelto and
Yeah.
Pradaxa, if those had been around at that time, that may have made a difference in what I chose to do. But since that wasn't an option, what I chose was the best option, and I'm glad I did because it was the right choice for me. But
Right.
people today have a lot of different choices because there's so much more available to them. More anticoagulants, more options such as left atrial appendage closure, and certainly lots of different procedures for managing the AFib. So there are a lot of things that have come along since that make the decision much easier for AFib patients today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that, right? Because, obviously you were on Coumadin well before the DOACs were out.
Yeah.
I was newly diagnosed, so, 38, and, probably after my first ablation, so, 6 years ago, I was put on Coumadin. So I was on
Mm-hmm.
Coumadin for almost 6 to 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother worked for one of the companies that had their own,
Mm-hmm.
oral anticoagulant as well. He's like, what are they doing? Like, why aren't you on one of the earlier, and they were the
Mm-hmm.
newer ones? And so
Yeah.
eventually I got to that,
Mm-hmm.
but I can appreciate the challenge because I was in there multiple times a week myself, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard and frustrating.
Yes.
So I'm glad that we have moved beyond that. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there's still pockets of, Coumadin being used. I don't know statistically what those numbers are, but it's a challenge. And,
Yeah.
particularly when you're dealing with the diagnosis and you're dealing with the heartbeats, the challenge to worry about is like, oh, now I have to worry about, having the stroke, which you don't want to. And,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and everything feeds
Mm-hmm.
into those things that you
Yeah.
want to just kind of be calm and relaxed a little bit. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's a challenge with some of the options, but I'm so grateful
Mm-hmm.
that the options are now more bountiful for all of the new AFib
Right.
diagnosis patients
Yeah.
out that are out there. So
Excellent.
so let me ask you this question, because obviously, I've seen you grow over the last 4 or 5 years, having attended your conference and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Are you surprised that you have grown into to be this the size of whatstopafib.org, the influence in which you have and your organization brings across when you're talking with
Mm-hmm.
key healthcare providers and patients in general?
Absolutely. That was not my initial plan. I was just going to create this little website that would talk about the different options and, get on with my life.
Yeah.
You know, Life had other plans for me. And I found that doors kept opening that I had no expectation of, didn't even know they existed. And so I tell new advocates, if you're on the right mission, the universe will conspire to make it happen. And
Yeah.
that's truly what happened to me. Um, I had opportunities. Um, I was very new in this, and I attended my first medical conference, Boston AF Symposium, in 2008. We launched the stopafib.org in 2007, and then in 2008 I was there, and I was invited to participate in an upcoming coalition, basically. And I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Eric Prostowski, one of the leaders in the field globally in electrophysiology. And um, he and I became good friends, and many things happened as a result of having him as someone who was an advocate for us and the work we
Right.
were doing. And so meeting the right influencers and having them help is life changing. And that
Yeah.
has really made a big difference for us. There have been so many doors that have opened that I didn't know existed, but opened because of the work that we were doing. And word got around, and we were invited to do things and invited to sit at tables that, you know, really influenced our care.
Yeah.
And even in about 2012 or so, I was invited by one of the leaders in the field to be part of one of the early guidelines for AFib.
Yeah.
It ended up being the 2014 AFib guidelines from AHA, ACC, and HRS, and I was asked to participate in that. And I was probably the first patient ever to participate in any of those guidelines. So there have just been a lot of opportunities that have come along where I've been able to share the perspectives of the AFib patient community. And so it's been a real blessing for us to have things happen and doors open
Yeah.
that allow us to make a difference in this world.
Yeah. No, that's amazing, and congratulations on all of
Thank
that,
you.
because
Thank you.
you are right, right? I mean, if you're, no pun intended, but if your heart is in the right place,
Yeah,
right, people will know you're genuine and
yeah,
authentic, and you're out there to do some good, and
yeah,
nothing more than that. So
yeah.
so that is great.
Thank
I
you.
guess, kind of leading a little bit more back to, treatment and patients in general.
Mhm.
What do you think is still the case when we think either patients are consistently getting wrong about what they're doing, or maybe it's something that they're not being told about their diagnosis? Is there anything that still kind of sticks out to you, kind of thinking to myself, boy, we still haven't fixed that part of it yet?
So I think that Dr. Prostowski was really on to something that I don't think a lot of his colleagues are doing yet. And that was that he had me come to Indianapolis, and he does an annual arrhythmia summit. And he asked me to keynote it. And after I keynoted, then he and I had kind of a fireside chat dialogue. And he said that one of the things that he heard in what I had been saying was that a new patient appointment should not be one appointment, it should be two. And that the doctor should handle the things that are most urgent, such as stroke prevention, and help the patient get oriented, then send them off to go to stopafib.org and learn everything they could and come back with their questions, and then deal with the overall plan and their more specific questions. Because what happens, and he did that, a lot of doctors don't. They still treat the first appointment as a standalone.
Sure.
And so the thing that makes the difference there is that when a patient goes for their first appointment, they feel like a deer in the headlights. They aren't able to grasp everything they're being told. So the doctor may tell them something, but they may not hear it or may not understand it.
Yeah.
And they don't even know that they haven't to ask for clarification because it's just coming at them so fast and they think they're getting it, but maybe they're not. And so allowing patients to go um, get the most important things handled first and then come back with their questions after they've learned some new things, I think is a really valuable way to go. And I'd love to see more doctors approaching it that way rather than fire hosing the patient with everything at that first appointment.
Yeah.
And then they may get 10 or 20% of it, but not really get some of the important stuff.
Right.
Because on our discussion forums and all the Facebook groups I'm on, I find that there's so very many misperceptions that have to be clarified. And it's because they didn't really understand, or maybe the doctor used jargon and the patient didn't understand and didn't even know to ask. And
Right.
so I think that there's a lot of misperception in the community that we have to clear up and clarify
Yeah.
because patients are just fire hosed and they don't know what they don't know.
That's so true. That's so true. And I think about my own experience, and again, I think too, the age in which you're diagnosed, I think also
Mm-hmm.
has a key thing. I mean, I was 38 years old, so
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was, for many years I thought to myself I was invincible, right? I was like, I'm just going to take on the world and I'll be fine. And
Yeah.
I was watching my parents, live long and healthy lives until unfortunately they didn't. But point being is I can remember going into my first, cardiology appointment and he's like, well, we can do an ablation or we could do, a beta blocker. And I'm like, what? I'm like, well, what's the ablation? He's like, well, it's a procedure, blah, 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 blah. And then I was by myself. I told my wife, my caregiver, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know you, I'm good. And I regret that because I know that if
Mm-hmm.
my wife was there, she would have said,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about that procedure. Because
Yeah.
if he's young enough, he should get this. Maybe this doesn't turn out to be as bad as it did. And
Mm-hmm.
my situation, as you know, didn't turn out great, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm blessed now that I am where I'm at. But
Yeah.
holy cow, I might have taken that 4 or 5 year journey and
Yeah.
turn it into a year and a half,
Right.
and come out of
Yeah.
this in a much different place. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that angle, and I love the education side of things too. And as my commitment to you as well as, our mission here is not to is to build on top of the shoulders of what
Mm-hmm.
you've built,
Mm-hmm.
because your educational platform is just phenomenal. And
Thank
and
you.
there's obviously the American Heart Association and everybody, but sometimes there's so much information. But what I love about what you've done is you've just really hammered it and siloed it down into very
Mm-hmm.
bite-sized materials. And I'm a training person by trade,
Yeah.
so when I look at that content and I think to myself, beautiful, understandable,
Thank
this
you.
is great. So kudos to that. So
Thank you.
and I think too, right? I'll emphasize this, and this has always been one of my big pet peeves is, patients themselves, speaking of myself, we don't fail treatment, right? It's actually
Yeah.
the systems is
Yeah.
what fails the patient, and
Yeah.
not out of what's the term I'm looking for? Not out of intent. It's
Mm-hmm.
just everybody's so busy. And when
Mm-hmm.
patients or excuse me, when physicians and EPs and they have to see 1,000 patients in a day, it's like you don't get the
Yeah.
2 appointments. You get the
Yeah.
maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's a missed opportunity. So I really love that. And I've never heard that before, by the way, that story with you and Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Prostowski. So I will echo that as much as I possibly can
Thank you.
to say, if you're diagnosed, go see Mellanie, then go to your doctor, and then what have you. So I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
And when you and I met a few years ago, I remember I reached out to you and you said, and
Mm-hmm.
you were so gracious. You're like, who are you? What are you trying to do? And where are you going? And I shared, like, I think it was like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, oh my gosh, you exist. Like, this is amazing. Like, how can I help? What can I do differently?
Yeah.
And so, my mission has always been around the lifestyle components
Mm-hmm.
and whole
Mm-hmm.
person care,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with this. And so when we talk about, because I know every day this is all I advocate for, in addition to, right, what your EP, what your
Mm-hmm.
cardiologist doing, and
Mm-hmm.
know all these things. Because when you look for the center of excellence, yes, docs are going to do what they're going to do, but you can
Mm-hmm.
control so much of it.
Yeah.
So when we look at really from when you were diagnosed to now and whatever, like how important has it become? And we know it's in the guidelines, but how important has lifestyle become in the management of the AFib experiences for patients?
So when I first started, um, doctors told me I was crazy because I contended that stress played a role in developing AFib.
Yeah.
Because the kinds of folks I was seeing, especially who were younger and had AFib, I was 51 at the time. Um, I knew that these were people who were high stress. They were in high stress occupations, or that it was just their nature to be on and going all the time.
Yeah.
And I felt like stress really played a role, but I was told that that was crazy. Stress doesn't play a role in AFib. Well, now we know it does. And
Right.
we're seeing a lot more interest in managing stress and doing things to help bring down the stress level. We also weren't seeing much in the way of other lifestyle factors either. Um, we we knew that some people got better if they'd exercised, and some people got worse.
Yeah.
We knew that some people had certain things in their diet that would make their AFib worse. Some people said, it's the flour and the sugar and the salt and those kinds of things that make it, that make my AFib worse. Other people said I'm triggered by foods. Others, found different things. And so it's the fact that it's so individual is a big deal as well. And the lifestyle component of it is also fairly individual.
It is.
So, along about 2008, there was some great research that came out from Dr. Susan Redline, who was at Case Western at the time, about the relationship between AFib and sleep apnea.
Mm.
And she indicated that it was that sleep apnea could greatly increase your chance of developing an arrhythmia. And it was some wonderful research, and she's done a lot of research subsequently. And she's now at Harvard, and she and I have worked together many times over the years. But just understanding the role of sleep apnea in developing AFib and exacerbating AFib. And we now know that about 80% of those who have AFib also have sleep apnea. So that's huge.
It is.
And so lifestyle is such an important component. We also know that weight can contribute to sleep apnea. There's so many things in the lifestyle domain that overlap.
Yeah.
And so each individual needs to find out what things about their lifestyle might be making their AFib worse, or might have even, be triggering their AFib. And so we were part of a study back in the around 2012-ish. We were part of a PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute group that was called the Healthy Heart Alliance, American Heart Association, University of California, San Francisco, and two other patient organizations and us. And we convened a patient-powered research summit and had patients define what research was needed. And then there were researchers as well as patients from all around the U.S. there. And so we broke down in groups based on interest. And the AFib group said, we really want to understand if triggers are a real thing or not.
Sure.
Things like different foods, caffeine, alcohol, etc. And so we proposed doing an N of 1 trigger study. N of 1 meaning the individual patient was their own control, and we'd use an application and a cardiomobile device to help them track it. And so we actually got that funded, and that study came out a few years ago showing that the main triggers for people were things like alcohol, but that caffeine was not a trigger. And we've done a lot of research subsequently that confirms that. And a lot of other things that we thought were triggers are not. Sleep apnea is definitely a trigger. And then the alcohol is a trigger, although I contend that with alcohol, it may be dehydration because alcohol dehydrates you.
Sure.
So there's so many lifestyle factors that figuring out what are the ones that affect you individually is a hard thing. And that's why that study, the N of 1 trigger study, was so important, because you decide what trigger you wanted to test. You test over about 6 weeks, and then you could test another trigger and subsequently another trigger, so that
Yeah.
patients could actually identify their own triggers as a result of that particular study.
Wow,
So
that's interesting.
individualizing what it is about lifestyle that affects you is a really important thing for AFib patients to consider.
Yeah. No, that's so important too, because I think about, again, my own experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
I was never a big drinker, but I certainly knew that if I had a glass of vodka, that
Mm-hmm.
would set me off. But if I had a beer, it would not. So it was
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not real sure what that was all about. But I also, for me too, was more than anything, it was dehydration for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can remember vividly just being out in the yard, warm summer day, and
Mm-hmm.
just not thinking anything, mowing your lawn. Next thing you're dehydrated, and I'd have to sit down for, my wife would come in and she's like, "Why do you have a mason jar full of water sitting next to you?" And I'm like, "Well,
Mm-hmm.
I got to drink that before I start to feel
Mm-hmm.
better." And then
Yeah.
literally 35, 40 minutes would come back, and my cells would replenish the fluids,
Mm-hmm.
and AFib would stop. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's so intriguing. But I really appreciate, your emphasis in our conversations prior to this podcast too, because about the individual experience, right? And that's what we need to hammer home, because an N of 1 is an N
Mm-hmm.
of 1.
Yeah.
And though we're all suffer the same fate of the diagnosis, it's just so individualized. And I think that's why when we talk from a lifestyle perspective, we
Mm-hmm.
ensure that our team of psychologists and everything else really get to the heart of the matter for those
Mm-hmm.
individuals to say, where do you want to begin?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes too, right? It's like when that patient says, "This is where I want to begin," it might
Mm-hmm.
not be the right way to go. And I'll,
Yeah.
I'll use a quick little example. And as you're aware of this, we did last summer. We started the, AFib lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
pilot, and we had what
Mm-hmm.
10 patients or so that participated. And this one individual, he was like, "I want to start working out right away because I want to lose weight," and blah 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 blah. And our team of psychologists is like, "Nope, we're gonna slow down. We're gonna address your sleep apnea first." He's like, "I don't get
Yes.
that. I don't need to. Blah 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 blah." And then they said, "Well, let me ask you a question." He said, "When you're not sleeping well, what do you
Mm-hmm.
do?"
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Well, I usually get up and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I go to the pantry and then I start to nibble on food." And they're like, "Well, then that's probably why you're gaining weight. So if we can get you to sleep,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to eat those
Yeah.
extra calories."
Yep.
And so within a month, he was down 10 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then his sleep apnea started going away. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden he started feeling all these other things coming
Yeah.
along with it. And so
Yeah.
it's so cool to see that when
Yep.
the aha moments come on for us individually.
Yep.
So great, so great.
Yep.
So let me ask you this one question too, because why do you think lifestyle modification is still generally underutilized when we have conversations? Because I know, you know, obviously we have this conversation with our clients across the country all the time, and people are still saying, "Yep, I get it. I let my patients know, yeah, you should do something about it," but nothing more than that outside of just a quick little blurb.
Yeah.
When do you think we'll get to that point of where it is truly, I know it's in the guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
and it's category 1, category, high level. When does this become all the time?
Yeah. So I think part of the challenge there is that most of the doctors have no training in how to manage lifestyle related things.
Yeah,
And so they don't really know how to best approach it with patients. And they often think of weight as an absence of willpower. And that's really not the case with people, with a lot of people, most people. And so I think that until they really understand, we're not going to make it very far
yeah,
unless they have programs to supplement them. And so we've seen the the best of the results coming out of Australia with Dr.
yes,
Prash Sanders and his team down there. And that's because they figured out how to create um, basically a center of excellence around all the things that patients need. Lifestyle and, behavior modification, sleep apnea, nutrition. They have figured out how to address all that, and their system allows them to do it. Our
Yeah.
system really doesn't, because the doctor is billing for the doctor's time. The doctor can't do a lot of overhead and bill for all these other things as easily. And so I think that's a big part of the problem currently, until there are appropriate mechanisms that the doctors can invoke to help it get billed.
Yep.
Then those services are not going to be available
Yeah.
for the doctors to prescribe.
Right.
And so that really is a big part of it, is the ability to be able to bill for those services.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because we've figured that out to a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because we've had conversations across
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
across the industry as well. And it doesn't come out and specifically state this is for AFib, right? But
Mm-hmm.
our model we use is collaborative care, right? And that
Yeah.
is part of the behavioral process.
Yeah.
And so we've had significant success in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just for us now trying to get that word out to everybody to say, hey, we can use collaborative care in order to get this
Mm-hmm.
to change, and you can at the end of the day bill for it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just for, trying to get that to everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
I wish we were, unfortunately, I'm not able to attend the HRS session here coming up in the next couple of weeks, but I see that there's some good sessions about lifestyle modification and how do we enhance it and do it. And so I'm intrigued, and I hope we can continue those conversations to see if we can help become a
Mm-hmm.
part of that. And
Yeah.
and this is, and you and I have not talked offline about this before, but I will, kind of little breaking news, so to speak, is we've had the opportunity to fully engage with Dr. Oz at CMS, um,
Fantastic.
because they've said, hey, we don't think you guys are thinking big enough. And
Yeah.
so we've had some opportunities to have some conversations where we're just waiting for them to
Great.
get back to us to say, hey, let's go out and try this and see where this works on a
Fantastic.
larger scale. So hopefully we'll be able to share something with you soon,
Great.
and I know you know far more people than I do, so you'd be the first person I'd be calling if we were able to break the news. But
Okay. Well,
it,
I'll keep my fingers crossed for
yeah,
you. That sounds wonderful.
and I think you brought up something earlier too, which is so important when what we think about here at Unlimited Heart and my partners at Nudj is that so much so is lifestyle is a skill set, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
something that people need to learn to do better.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't a skill, we'd all be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be all
Yeah.
in good shape. But everybody needs to learn how to do it, because we just, well, you either know what you know, or but you don't, you know what you know, but you don't know how to get it going, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's so important when it comes to performance, and the right mindset and the right skills to go ahead with that is
Mm-hmm.
so important. So let's talk a little bit about some of the, and we've covered so many different things here, Mellanie, and I appreciate it. And I know we're running short on time here, but I wanted to kind of ask you a quick question around, you know, with the growth of the latest technologies, with
Mm-hmm.
the transformation in ablation technologies, and pulse field ablation obviously being the latest and greatest aspect
Mm-hmm.
of it. What are your thoughts about the growth? Is it going too fast? Is it are we seeing what we're expecting, those types of things out of pulse field ablation as compared to RFA or cryo as well?
So, a lot of what's happening in the procedure world is driven by the fact that we really don't have a lot of solid medications for treating AFib patients. And once they fail a medication, then doctors are saying, okay, what do I do now? And so we know that procedures are a good way to go.
Yeah.
We also are starting to see research, and really have been seeing it over 3 or 4 years, that early rhythm control is really the best way to go.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot more of the procedures being offered a lot earlier, sometimes without even failing a medication. And so pulse field ablation has so much potential because it's quick, it's it seems to be really good for those with less experience with it, so there's not as steep a learning curve with it. There seems to be less collateral damage, although if they do too many lesions, that can create some issues.
Yeah.
But the right number of lesions, the right amount of treatment is a good thing. So I think we're going to continue to see that grow because we now know that early rhythm control is not only important, but it can effectively help reset the AFib.
That's great.
I heard as we were getting ready to see the new guidelines a few years ago, there was a wonderful session at American Heart Association where I remember specifically Dr. John Puccini talking about how when you have the ablation, it effectively kind of resets your AFib. Not resetting it necessarily to zero,
Yeah.
but it helps you, it doesn't progress, and it can reset your time clock for moving towards progression, and that's a really good thing. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of the procedures as a result of that.
Okay.
One of the things that I am excited about is that I'm starting to see inklings that we may be having more medications coming down the pike as well. And I think that's going to be a really good
Okay.
thing because that's going to provide an opportunity for us to have some treatments that maybe are more effective. A lot of the stuff that we have is works for some people and not for others. There's some really great medications that work well for some people and don't work for others. And so figuring out what's the optimal medication to start with while we figure out the right plan, I think is a good direction. But I think we're going to continue to see more and more of the
Yeah.
procedures. But what I'm hoping is that the PFA will be more effective, and thus we will see fewer reablations. Now it's not a be-all, end-all,
Right.
and there will be a need for multiple ablations for some people. But some people, if we catch them quickly enough, maybe we can get by with fewer overall ablations.
Yeah.
So in my case, I had AFib that was intermittent, and I got mine treated at 22 months. I believe that that's part of the reason that mine was really successful is because we got it early before it really
Yeah.
progressed. And so seeing effective procedures being used promptly, I think is going to help us have much better overall and long-term results. So I think it's a really encouraging thing.
That is encouraging, and I like that. I like that concept a little bit. If I could go back in time, I certainly would have done things a little bit differently. But then again, my story won't be as juicy. So
True. You would have had half the book that you have.
that is so true. That is so true. So one of the things I like to focus on real quick, and as we start to wind down here a little bit, is just to do a quick little rapid fire questions for you, and then
Okay.
we'll wrap things up and move on to the next thing. But so when we take a look at the rapid fire, let me ask you this. So what is one habit every AFib patient should adopt immediately?
This is less of a habit and more of something they should check out. They should be checked for sleep apnea. I think that's
Okay.
really the very first step because if you find you have sleep apnea and you treat it religiously, you have a much greater chance of decreasing the amount of AFib that you have and maybe even potentially getting it under control.
Love that. Love that. What was the best piece of advice you've ever received
Related to AFib or just in
related to
general?
AFib? Yep.
So, I can't really think of any one piece of advice. I think this was really more my own thinking, and the idea of one and done was, I think, really important for me
Yeah.
because I got a procedure early. I got something that was a little more aggressive, and so for me, one and done was really important. But I think maybe for today's patient, treat early and treat often to try to get rid of it.
Sure. Sure. I love that. And then the final question for this is, what does living an AFibulous life mean to you?
To me, it means getting your life back, managing the AFib so it doesn't manage you, and hopefully getting rid of it. That's
Yeah.
really what we try to do, is to help people get rid of it and help them find their solution. And so for me, it's about having it under control and not having to worry about it.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Mellanie, for that. And I want to thank you very much again for your time, your energy.
Thank
Our
you.
friendship over the course of the last few years here has been wonderful. And, I think one thing, if we could summarize, today and just our mission in general, is AFib doesn't define you,
Yeah,
right? It helps to refine you. And that's
love
where
it.
we can start to, as you said, that individuality about each of our
Hmm.
respective experiences really drives the direction of our care.
Yeah.
And that ultimately starts with us as
Hmm.
becoming centers of excellence. And then
Yeah.
also a whole nother episode would be talking about our caregivers and, those
Yeah.
that love us and take care of ourselves, because we need to make sure they stay healthy too.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you very much. And I will tell to all the audience here, please go take a look at stopafib.org. Mellanie has done a yeoman's task in aggregating all this appropriate and beautiful information to help educate the community. So, Mellanie, I can't thank you enough for your time today. And I'll just continue to encourage all of our listeners to take control of your own health, go out, and we'll look forward to talking to you next. With our next episode, we'll let you know we've got some breaking. We have psychologists are coming in next, Mellanie, to talk about the behavioral aspects of the diagnosis. So pretty pumped up about that. But Mellanie, we'll sign off for today, but thank you so
Thank you.
much and safe travels to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.